Hey everyone, today I'm going to cover the third PowerPoint for Unit 3. We'll cover elections, which is very timely, so make sure you're paying attention. All right, so first of all, we're going to start talking about people who've over the years have been denied the right to vote, at least, historically speaking. Some of these people still face difficulties getting the right to vote today. Women who did not gain the right to vote until 1920, almost 100 years ago. Native Americans, African Americans, non-property holders. So it's kind of important to keep this in mind that, when the Constitution was being written, they were talking about white land-owning men, right? So it took time over the years to get these people able to get the right to vote. All right. Requirements to vote in most states. You got to be at least 18 years old, have to be a U.S. citizen. Convicted felons will have to have served their time. There are some states that still do not allow felons, even after they've gotten out of prison and served their time, to vote. However, you started to see over the years more states relaxing those restrictions and beginning to expand voting rights to former convicts, though. All right, so here's just some important constitutional amendments that expanded suffrage, which means the right to vote. The 15th Amendment was written to give former male slaves the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave all women the right to vote. The 23rd Amendment gave citizens of Washington, D.C. 3 electoral votes in the Electoral College. 24th Amendment eliminated poll taxes, which were put in place to target African Americans in the South and some poor whites. Voting Rights Act of 1965, which removed literacy tests. And then you've got the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age because originally it was 21. Voting Rights Language Assistance Act, so on and so forth. All right, so steps to voting. All right, you have to be registered. All right, there was something passed a while back called the National Voter Registration Act. Allowed people to register when getting their driver's license. That's how I registered to vote once I went and got my license at 16. They asked, if I wanted to pre-register so that when I was 18, I would not have to worry about, jumping through the hoops of doing that. I would have already gone through that process. So that was pretty convenient. But, you can register in a number of other ways as well. Got to go to your polling place. Polling places change from year to year, from election to election. This is where you go and physically vote in person if you're going to go vote. Polling places are located within precincts, which is your voting district. All right, so once you're there, you'll get a ballot, which is, all the races in the list of candidates, and then, you got to step to the voting booth and vote. All right, especially nowadays in the midst of a pandemic, you've heard about absentee voting, absentee ballots. You have to ask for these in advance. This is, if you cannot make it to go vote the day of the election. So, with all the health concerns going on right now with COVID, you've seen a lot of people request mail-in ballots, absentee ballots. Mail-in ballots and absentee ballots are the exact same thing. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever. Winners are determined in elections by, poll workers and election workers counting the votes, taking ballots and results, reporting those to local election boards for verification. There's also things called exit polls, which, are not at every polling location, but, exit polls try to, the media tries to predict who's going to win certain elections by asking people how they voted after people have voted. This is especially used in presidential elections. So this is how, say the night of the election, which, by the way, this year, it's highly unlikely that we will find out who the president is going to be the night of the election this year, because there's going to be so many absentee ballots to count. But there will be some states that will be able to use exit polls to properly predict who will win. So that's how people will know. Well, how can they how can they call Indiana in favor of Trump if only 1% of the vote's in? It's statistics, it's exit polling, it's stuff like that. All right. All right. So why do some people not vote? People maybe don't meet state requirements. They feel disenchanted. No one represents them. They feel like their vote doesn't make a difference. And that's just not true. There's been entirely too many elections. They may not be national elections, but there's absolutely been local elections, even state elections, where elections have been decided by a mere few votes. All right. So once you get the right to vote, do not take it for granted. All right. There are entirely too many people who take the right to vote for granted. All right, real quick, I just have like a question I wanted to ask you on this. Actually, skip this because I don't think this is statistically correct. So just kind of skip this. All right. Types of elections. All right. There are primaries and then there are generals. Okay. Primary elections are elections in which people from the same political party compete for their party's nomination. All right. So, there are primary elections for federal, state, and local elections. All right. So, Joe Biden won the Democratic primary, which means that he defeated other Democrats in the primary to represent the Democratic Party for president. All right. That's an example of a primary election. Some states have closed primaries. Some states have open primaries. Some states have caucuses. All right. And this just kind of goes through and explains what each one is. So a closed primary would mean that, only Democrats can vote for Democrats in a primary election. An open primary means that, you could either be unaffiliated or you could be, a Republican who maybe wants to vote in the Democratic primary. All right. And then a caucus. Caucus is pretty convoluted. And, with the Iowa caucus debacle from earlier this year, I think people are starting to move further and further away from caucuses because it's whenever people have to meet up in some central location, whether that be like a local church, a gym, a school, a library, wherever, and they have to, basically get in corners and say, all right, well, I support Pete Buttigieg, or I support Bernie Sanders, or I support Joe Biden, or I support Elizabeth Warren. And then you have to meet a certain threshold. And if, in this certain precinct or in this certain polling place, if Bernie Sanders supporters only have like 9% of the vote, they have to then split off and they can go to another candidate or they can go home. It's very complex. All right. And then lastly, you've got your general elections. This is where you choose a candidate for office. So, this is where Republicans would face off against Democrats. All right. There's also other things. We got initiatives, propositions, referendums. This is basically people voting directly on issues. So this would be like an example of a direct democracy in action. Now, obviously, this is not always going to happen. There are plenty of instances, of things like this happening that, what I'm trying to say basically is that, citizens don't vote on issues all the time, right? We generally elect our representatives to make these decisions on our behalf, but there are some times whenever something will be put on the ballot to ask the people if they support it or not. So think about like Brexit, for example. The decision for Britain to leave the European Union, that was a referendum, right? That was asking the people, do you want to leave the European Union, yes or no? And then, all right. Special elections. If people are unhappy with a state or a local official, they can vote to recall them, which basically removes them from office. It's similar to impeachment, but the people are directly involved, but keep in mind here I said a state or local official. If there's an unfair election, the North Carolina Elections Board can declare there to be a new election. In 2018, in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District, there was a case of a Republican versus a Democrat, where someone who worked for the Republican candidate was going around collecting absentee ballots from voters, specifically minority voters, specifically mostly black voters, and then mysteriously them disappearing and not being counted, which is illegal. That is election fraud. And so the elections board called for there to be a new election, which took place about a year or so later in 2019. So that can happen. All right. So campaigning for office, there's a number of different ways that you can get your candidate of choice name out there. There's canvassing, there's advertising, there's propaganda, there's phone banking as well. And these are just all the things that go in there. All right, propaganda techniques, jumping on the bandwagon, glittering generalities, right? This all pretty much makes sense. You don't have to necessarily have all this memorized or anything. It's just kind of cool to keep up with and take note of. Here's this campaign ad. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to, but it's an ad from the 1964 presidential election, and it's a good example of what was it, name calling? Yeah, name calling. All right, so you can watch this to kind of get an example of what that would look like. And then here's another one, which is pretty brutal. This is from the 1988 presidential election between George H.W. Bush and Michael Dukakis. Once again, you don't have to watch it, but it's pretty interesting, to say the least. All right. How much do campaigns cost? A lot of money. a lot of money. In 2016, over $6.5 billion was spent total on the presidential campaign and congressional campaigns combined. Money comes from numerous sources. You've got people donating to candidates. You've got the government making sure that elections are safe and secure, or supposed to anyway. Corporations, interest groups, PACs, political action committees, which we kind of mentioned in the first PowerPoint, organizations that are set up by interest groups to raise money for certain candidates who, adhere to a certain belief system that those interest groups want. Limited contributions in order to keep corruption out of elections. Haha, that's funny. There is a maximum amount that someone can donate to a candidate, and one person, that is. So one person cannot donate any more than $2,700 to a candidate. That's $5,000 for a PAC. So if you've went ahead and maxed out your amount that you can donate, you could donate, a lot of money to a PAC, and then they could then spend that money for that candidate themselves. That's not illegal. That is a loophole, which, gotta love it. There is no limit to however much a candidate wants to raise for themselves or put into their own campaign. So, Donald Trump put a lot of money of his own into his presidential campaign in 2016, and he has made it known that he is more than willing to do that again this year. So just more information about contributions. All right. So there's two different terms here to differentiate between. There's hard money and then there is soft money. Hard money is money given directly to a candidate. Once again, that's limited. You can only give so much hard money to a candidate. But then soft money is money given to a party, given to the party of your choice, Republican or Democrat. And then from there, they can give that money to whoever they feel like needs the most resources, whether that be, federal elections, state elections, or local elections. An incumbent, these are politicians who are in office who are seeking to be reelected. So, of course, President Trump right now is the incumbent. He's already the sitting president. He is seeking reelection. That's an example. Lastly here, what trends are likely to come about in campaign financing in the future? especially within the Democratic primary this go around. There's been more of a focus on small donations from everyday voters as opposed to large donations by political action committees, PACs. That's not to say that PAC money is going to go away anytime soon, but especially amongst the Democratic Party, there's kind of more of a shift towards getting money from everyday voters as opposed to corporations and special interest groups. And lastly, use of internet to campaign. In 2008, Barack Obama kind of revolutionized the way of online of internet campaigning, and that's only been built upon over the last decade, and that's sure to continue to evolve, but it's not going to be going anywhere. It might be changing a little bit, but you know, the internet is the internet. A lot of people use it every single day. So that a lot of the times nowadays that's a more efficient way of reaching voters as opposed to just running TV ads or mail advertisements. All right. So make sure you complete the quiz on the next slide, and that's all I got for you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.